than wrong ones, and that's about all you can hope for. You know, and I'm looking around, and the people here from my life, Randall Kleiser, I mean, I wrote in his book, we were joined at the hip from going with Plastic Bubble onward. That ain't so bad. You know, and it just, Marilu, and I really am going to cry in a bit. So I'm going to turn this over to Marilu, who does this better than anybody. And I'll get to the Ted Danson story a little later.
Okay, so you want to sit down?
Yeah.
There's two microphones.
There are two microphones.
So we'll sit.
And you'll tell me how to use a microphone.
Okay. Come on. The shape is perfect for sex, drugs, and Okay, so here's the thing. When you're an actor in Los Angeles and you're just starting out, and you get to meet someone, and he becomes your champion, because we all know you don't become successful in this business unless somebody falls in love with you. And it doesn't mean that there was an affair. It doesn't mean that, something happened. It just means that somebody becomes your champion and really believes in you. And now I'm going to cry. And Joe was that person for me, for Danny DeVito, obviously for Ted, for so many people. And when you became a Joel person, not only did he bring you into everything that maybe you weren't even right for, but he felt like somebody should meet you, and eventually you're going to connect with the right thing. And that's what this book is about. It's his stories. They're unbelievable. He called me. Okay, I'm going to throw a date around. It was September 15th, 2017, Friday. I was in, it was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And I was in Chicago because my son was going into his senior year of Northwestern University, and I was helping him put his apartment together. And he called me and said, I want to write a book. It's called Sex, Drugs, and Pilot Season. And he walked me through it, and I went, oh my God, that's such a great idea. And he said, I'm going to tell this story, this story, this story. So, Joel, I've been reading like every iteration of this book for a long time, even though he didn't fucking put me on the back cover of the book. I'm the one here tonight. That's okay. And the stories are great, and they're real, and they're funny, and they're Joel. Very, very Joel. And so many people, I feel like I'm in not only your bar mitzvah, which is what I went to on your 70th birthday, but this is like a wedding that you never had. So that's why I had 3 of them, because you get to see so many people that you love, and it's so fabulous. So let's start with, what is it that has to jump out at you to begin with, for you to find so many great people, whether it was Johnny Travolta for Boy in the Plastic Bubble with Randall Kleiser, or Ted, or me, or Danny, who was down to his last $10. There's a famous Danny DeVito story that's in the book. So what is it? Somebody walks in, because so many young actors want to know, what is it that has to jump off the page for someone like you to notice them?
Well, the first thing is that that you notice is there's something about them that's special, and you can't define that.
Right.
And you also can't buy it or rent it. You can't buy it or rent it or get it anywhere.
Right.
Little tips, in terms of, if an actor comes into, oh God, I'm going to get so lost in this.
No.
It literally is that special thing that you don't. I met John Travolta when he was 17. He had just moved into New York. There is something special about him the minute you saw him, the minute you talked to him. I don't know how to define that. Believe it or not, when I was casting Bob Newhart, we were casting for his next door neighbor was an airline pilot, and we were casting for a girlfriend for the airline pilot who was a stewardess, flight attendant. Anyway, there were 7 women who read. One of them was a woman named Farrah Fawcett, and and Farrah didn't get the part, and someone else did, who gave the best reading. And I turned to the guys and I said, "Excuse me, I'm the gay one in the room. And you didn't want to go with Farrah. You don't want to go with her. You're crazy." But I didn't get my way. But the minute you saw her, and this was pre-poster, pre-everything, you knew there was something there.
Right. So, of all the stories in the book, which story do you feel like really typifies your magic in casting?
Well, this story is going to embarrass Ted.
Okay.
No. Uh-oh.
He doesn't.
It's not.
Not his.
this is a story that really is a very good example of me and my vulgarity. But it's also how Ted got cast in Cheers. It came down. Lots of people read, but well, first of all, he's not here tonight. But when I met Jimmy Burrows was a friend that I knew from we both worked for David Merrick at about the same time in the 60s. And when I first even heard about Cheers and knew about it, I said to Jimmy, Jimmy and the Charles brothers, I said, you know, you're going to meet everybody in town and you're going to wind up with Ted Danson and Shelley Long.
You just became very good at predicting what was going to
I
happen.
knew you were going to see everybody because it was from two classy writers and a classy director, and they were going to see everybody as they should have. But what happened was, at that time, there was a management change, and Grant Tinker, who was, you know, Mary Tyler Moore's husband, and they had a company, MTM Productions. So Grant comes to NBC as my Uber boss, and he came to a casting session, and the casting session with three different couples, one of Ted and Julia Duffy. Did you read with?
I read with Shelley, but
with Shelley, that's right, of course. But Shelley, and there were two other couples. One of the other couples was William Devane, and I forgot, it was
Fred
Lisa
Dreyer.
Eichhorn.
yes.
Fred Dreyer and Julia Duffy and Lisa Eichhorn. And so what happened?
All in the book, by the
All
way.
in the book. So what happens is you go off to a little room in the back, and it's interesting, we're talking about, you know, Ted's sex appeal or someone else's sex appeal, and there were no women in the room, by the way. So it's kind of interesting when that happens. And we go around the room once or twice, and to me I said, well, there's no choice. It's Ted. It's very simple. But however, Grant Tinker disagreed with me, and he's my new boss. And Grant was a very proper gentleman, you know, always very Brooks Brothery, and always wearing an Easter-colored sweater around his neck. And he was very proper. That's the key word to this. And finally I got tired of this going around the room. And I said, look, it comes down to this, very simple. More women in America are going to want to fuck Ted than Bill Devane.
Can we have a show of hands?
You know, and it was, I've always been known for being direct, but, you know, maybe that was a little too direct, but that was the truth. So the next time we went around the room, everybody voted for Ted. And Grant Tinker, by the way, never came to another casting session.
Wow.
It's a wonderful story.
Okay, I gotta run.
You start the book with like an apology about David Hasselhoff.
Yes.
So how did you pick him of all the people you could have apologized for?
Well, only because, well, honestly, because David Hasselhoff now, you know, he's a punchline, and he shouldn't be a punch. Well, he should because of the hamburger thing. But he was a soap star for 10, 12 years, and I was the one who got him on the soap. I was responsible for getting his soap job. What was the next one? Knight Rider, and then Baywatch. So all three shows, I was the one responsible for it.
Yeah.
So the name of the chapter is called David Hasselhoff ... blame me. But
Has he read the book yet?
I don't know whether to show it to him.
Oh yeah, you probably love it.
I think so too. If he,
Yeah,
you
he's
know.
got a good sense of humor.
That's what I
himself.
thought. That's what I
Yeah,
thought.
for sure. So, I mean, was there any story that you wanted to put in the book that you didn't because you were afraid of either offending somebody or somebody said, no,
Let me get
your
this.
publisher said, why not?
Yeah.
That you thought, no, it might be going too far.
Honestly, no.
So all the juice is in there.
I mean, if I talked about, you know, having sex with Robert Reed during The Boy in the Plastic
my
Bubble,
God.
you know.
You said don't ask that story, Marilu.
But I
You
can
said
tell
there's,
it.
yeah, you
I
did.
can tell it.
You repeated. He said, let's not talk about Robert Reed.
Well, you know, with me, who knows? One
You
minute's
never.
yes, 1 minute's no.
Right, that's right.
Anyway, and then Randall never knew about that either, but that's another story.
Yeah, but there it is.
But there it is.
Yes. Okay, so now I know from talking to you about Taxi, well, I'll tell you my own story about it. So they wanted a 33-year-old Italian New Yorker. I was 25, red hair, Polish and Greek from Chicago. My mother was in the hospital dying in Chicago, and the only time I left her during the last 2 months of her life was to come and audition for Taxi because I was a Joel person, and he had me come in for everything. And so he had me come in, and I was with all these much older actors who were like in their 40s actually to play like sometimes 35, etc. And so he kept bringing me back, and it was like I just felt like I had to audition 4 times. My mother passed away in May the 13th of 1978, and my final audition was May the 26th. But then at the Grease party, the Grease big extravaganza party on June 4th, Sunday night, Joel looked at me and he went like this, like a thumbs up. So I knew I'd gotten the job. So you had to fight for me too, because I was too young to play Elaine. But you thought, you know, and I did have another job. So
I can elaborate on that. Excuse me. Oh, girls. So
Sorry.
I can elaborate on that because I'm not above lying when you need to do so. So the way Marilu got the job was, which is kind of true, but I didn't know it at the moment. But what I said was, look, if guys don't make a decision today, we're going to lose her.
Which was true.
But
Because I had done Paper Chase.
But I didn't know it was true. I just said that because in casting, very often the more time you have to decide, the more you start second guessing yourself. So that's why I did that.
Yeah. No, well, thank you. And you know, the famous Danny DeVito story was he was down to his $10. He had no more, you know,
Nothing.
No, he had nothing. He didn't even have a clean shirt. He put on an old shirt. He went into the audition. He was on passed his last unemployment check.
Let me interrupt you.
Okay, no, please, it's your book.
For that part, I was told, you know, when I read the script, they said, now don't waste your time too much on Louis. He's never going to have more than a line or two each episode.
And 7 out of 15.
I didn't remember what it was, but they said, don't waste your time. All we need is a funny character, a funny-looking character. And I had met Danny because he flew himself out to do a part on Starsky and Hutch. It was a director who said, and it was a director who I knew was tasteful and smart, and he said, trust me on this one, he'll fly himself out, and the role was a friendly loan shark. And Danny came out and was wonderful, and that's how I met him. And that's when that part, I brought in 2 people for that part. One was a ringer, because you have to bring in 2. And, you know, then Danny walked in and took the script. He's done this, and he went like this. Who wrote this shit?
And they went, that's our Louis.
That's our Louis. That's how we got the part.
So where did your love for casting come? Because I know you tell some stories about being young and everything else and how you fell in love with it. But like, just tell us why you fell in love with casting of all things.
Well, I think the way I fell in love with casting was I grew up in Brooklyn, in East New York. There's now a television series called East New York, and I love it when they show the street signs of where I used to live. But you know, I wasn't a sissy, but I wasn't athletic. You know, I have no hand and eye coordination. I can't. You know, I could never dribble. I couldn't do anything like that. I was very good at lots of other sports, but not that one. And losing track.
How you fell in love with casting?
So what I would do is, you know, instead of playing stickball or whatever in the street, I would go home and I would watch television. And I would go to the library and listen to musical comedy records. But television movies was what I loved to do. And I must say, my mother encouraged this. I would go to the kiddie show at the Biltmore Theater for 25 cents on a Saturday for the kiddie show and the cereals and Flash Gordon and all that. And then I'd hide in the bathroom. My mother gave me 2 sandwiches, one for lunch, one for dinner. And then I would come out at the right time and I'd stay for the adult shows. And then I would go home. So at an early age, I talk in the book, for instance, none of you are going to remember Samson and Delilah with Hedy Lamarr. And,
yeah.
Okay. But the point is, I could only see Victor mature, you know, in playing Gladiator, those kind of roles. If you put him in the suit, why is he doing that? He shouldn't be doing that. And there were certain character actors that I began to recognize who appeared over and over again, basically playing the same character. So I guess it just absorbed all of it, and my brain was receptive to that.
Yeah. Well, you certainly have done an incredible job. What was your first thing that you were responsible for to cast that you went, oh, I love this?
You know, I think it was when I was working for David Merrick. You know, and I think it started with, again, Randall will know this one, I got there in the middle of replacement casting for a lot of shows. So the first thing was a boulevard comedy, a light comedy called 40 Carats. No one's going to remember it. But there was a road company of it. And I said, you know who would be really good at this? She was a very well-known 1960s kind of B-movie actress, but her name is Barbara Rush. And Barbara Rush did the road company of 40 Carats, you know, and wow, that worked.
Yeah.
You know, and also something happened at Merrick, which it was wonderful. I went to work for David Merrick as the assistant to his general manager. David Merrick, for those of you who don't know, in the mid to late 60s, was the most important Broadway producer. When I went to work for Merrick in a business capacity, I was the general manager and who was the hatchet man who did all the bad business stuff. I was his assistant. But I would come in early every day and I would talk to Jack. There were no coffee machines in the office, so I had to get that from Act 4 on the corner, bring up coffee and bagels. And we would talk, and I'd tell him, this is what I saw last night. And by the way, Brenda Vaccaro's understudy went on last night in Cactus Flower, and she was really good. And when Brenda leaves, this one will be a lot cheaper. So I knew that Jack would respond to the word cheap. So anyway, one day Jack buzzes me, and he was fierce. He was really, really feared. Then he said, get in here. So I go into his office, and he said, look, I can't stand working with you anymore. So you got a choice. You could go work with Biff Liff, who was in charge of production, which included casting. You could become our casting director, get a $50 a week raise, or you're fired. And I said to Jack, I don't know anything about casting. And he said, yes, you do, you just don't know you do.
Wow.
The irritant gets the pearl. You know, always.
So that's how
great.
that happened.
Yeah, but people love you. I mean, look at, I've been book soup so many times. Look at this. This place is packed.
Yeah.
You know, and they love your story, and you like walk through life with this like smiley face, no matter what you've been through. You can't get you down, you know, and you just enjoy your life, and you enjoy all the people that you've, you know, come in contact with, and obviously everybody loves you. When you put this book together, and I saw you put it together, you picked all the different like highlights, right? So was there one particular highlight that you felt like, this is a story I have to tell?
Oh God, I wish I could prepare for that question because I can't think of the answer on the. I think it's. I don't
Well,
know.
you
Let me
know.
look at the chapters. I'll tell you.
Well, it's got to be like Grease or.
Oh
maybe
no! In terms of casting, well, Grease was very interesting because it was the best of times for me and it was the worst of times for me. I had seen Grease 6 times off Broadway. There was a man who's no longer with us by the name of Bob Lamont, who was a manager, and Bob Lamont, among his clients, were Marilu Henner, John Travolta, Jeff Conaway, Katherine Hellman. I could go on, and Bob was my best friend.
Oh, cool.
And through Bob, that's how Boy and Plastic Bubble happened, really. Bob would come over every Saturday. I'd be reading my Starsky and Hutch scripts for the week or the next 2 weeks. And he'd be reading whatever, and we'd be getting melanoma sitting under the sun. So John was, I may have gotten off track, but it's a good story.
Okay.
But Bob had a client who, at that point, was his hottest client because he was doing a series called Welcome Back, Kotter. And John was on every teenage magazine you could think of, and the hottest thing around at that time. You know, so. Anyway, and Bob said he's coming up, the Kotter's over, he wants to do something so that people will know he's not Vinnie Barbarino. And he said, but he only has a month off, and he was offered the Richard Gere part. As a matter of fact, Richard Gere's career is totally due to John Travolta not being able to do 3 movies. So anyway, so we're doing this, and I'm just finishing reading the Boy in the Plastic Bubble script. And I said to Bob, well, here. Bob had said, I got to pull a rabbit out of a hat. And I said, here's your rabbit. And this was Saturday morning. By Saturday night, Bob had read the script and said, I really like it. I'm sending it to John. By Sunday night, John said, I want to do it. Monday, going into the office, I was working at Spelling Goldberg, Aaron Spelling and Leonard Goldberg. They didn't believe me. They said, he wants to do this? And I said, yes. They called ABC, the head of ABC, Mike Eisner, said, we've offered him everything. Why does he want to do this? You know, and that's the way it went. And they made a cash offer, and John asked for 3 times as much and got it, and that's how it happened. And that was a Wednesday. I said, oh, by the way, there's this young director that I know who's done a couple of Starsky and Hutches and so on. He'd really be very good, Randall Kleiser. And I don't know, there was another element to the package that I don't remember, but this was a Wednesday, and by Friday we had a movie going.
But that's what I mean. You're so fearless. You're not afraid of your own opinion. You know, you're definitely not from the keep quiet and let me live school.
Well, you know, I've always thought, what are you paying me for?
Yeah, right, exactly.
You're paying for my opinion.
Right.
If you don't want it, don't pay me.
Right. Right. But not everybody feels that way. You know.
Well,
they
then they should.
Yeah, they should. They should. No, there's so much that that you've done. Okay, so now you've worked with Randall and then John, and so now you get to cast Grease. So between Boy in the Plastic Bubble and Grease was Taxi, and and
Taxi,
just like Grease, right?
a few other things. Yeah, exactly.
Grease. I mean, Grease you were casting in '77.
Right. But I started saying Grease was the best of times and the worst of times because I had no official capacity on Grease. Randall is not a musical comedy queen. He's not even a lady in waiting. And so he gets his job casting this musical, and Randall said to me, he was afraid to take the part. I said, don't worry, I'll be there every day. And I was there every day, but I had no portfolio. And Alan Carr, who you may have heard of, let's say Alan Carr and I agreed on virtually nothing. You know, his suggestions were ridiculous for the roles, including a porn star to play the Sid Caesar part, and he paid him $5,000. So I submitted when a casting gets a job, you make out your ideas and you send them to the producer or the studio or whatever. And Paramount liked all of my ideas and didn't like Alan's. So he I was on a shit list, and my deal was how to stay at least at the top of it, not sink any further. And that's the way it was. But the best thing that happened to Grease was that Alan had one of the first, where they staple your stomach, and it didn't work, and he was in the hospital most of the time, and he wasn't around. And this started with the screen test. God, I could go on forever, so just stop me. So Olivia Newton-John, and I'm going to cry, who people should say about Olivia, they shouldn't start with how beautiful they was. She should start with how smart she was. But that never happens with women. They always do the beauty first. But Olivia was smart. And she originally said, I don't know if I want to do this. She had done a movie before, which she was very unhappy with. She was 4 years older than John, and basically didn't want to be embarrassed because she was a huge pop star. And she asked for a screen test. It's the only time I've ever heard of an actor asking for a screen test. So we're on the set, full film. This wasn't a cheapo little thing on tape. And we did the scene at the drive-in. First take, crew isn't laughing. Second take, crew is not laughing, and it's like, what's going on here? And I found out what's going on here because I had read somewhere that during the pre-production of Hello, Dolly on Broadway, which was a version of Thornton Wilder's The Matchmaker, whenever there was a problem with the stage dialogue, Gower Champion took out the matchmaker and said, oh, here's the problem, let's put that back. I did the same thing with the Samuel French version of the musical. Wow. So I pulled out it and I looked at it and I said, oh, this is why it's not working. Alan's dialogue is terrible. So because there was no reason. Alan, by the way, and Bronte Woodard, neither one are around anymore, did a magnificent job of opening it up. They did a sensational job about that, but they really fucked up all the dialogue completely. And I showed Randall, I said, here's why it's not working. Here's the play dialogue, use that. And the next take, crew is laughing. So who knows what would have happened. And I had no backup for Olivia. If Olivia had said no, I'd be playing that part.
Should we open up for a couple questions?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, in case, yes.
Joel, can you, I already know the story, but it's just such a great story. I'd love for you to tell your audience. You were the one who came up with an quote-unquote alternative for Dorothy in Golden Girls.
Well, I'm trying to make sense. I came up with an alternative, but if I had known the true story, I wouldn't have even done this, which was I did not know that the woman who wrote it, whose name just went out of my head,
Susan Harris.
Susan Harris wrote that part specifically and only for B. Arthur. Now, my boss, Brandon Tartikoff, did not want B. Arthur. And and basically I was, he said, who can play this part besides her? And I said, well, Brandon, there's this woman in New York you won't know, but her name is Elaine Stritch. And he said, well, bring her in, fly her out, and do all of that, which I did. And I didn't know Stritch as a friend, but as a casting director, and I knew that she would be a hit on television, a few things. So I flew her out, and she comes into my office basically, and then she excused herself to freshen up, which literally meant going into the John and having a little bit of this. And she comes back in, and and the room was ice cold. I don't know if any of you are actors. You can tell the temperature of the room. So it was a non-starter. So she reads, and when an actor reads and it's a comedy and you don't get any laughter, you tend to push. And of course, the more you push, the worse it gets. Anyway, so afterwards, with thank you, and she left. And then I found out only after the fact that that there was the only one who was going to get that part was V. Arthur. And Brandon said, well, the public hates her, this and this. And Susan Harris said, Brandon, forget, this is not the V. Arthur show. She's one of 4 women, which makes sense. And Brandon said, fine. So that was that story.
Wow. Great story. Anybody else have a question? Or want
There's
to
a hand back there.
Oh. Yes.
Along those lines, for the listeners, I believe you had an interaction with Rock Hudson.
Oh.
Is it like a Robert Reed story?
Oh, you are awful. You really are awful.
These are plants.
No, he's not a plant. He's
I'm
my
a neighbor.
I'm at a party. It's a party for all men. And there was at that time there was the first full-length feature film porn movie called Boys in the Sand. Anyway, it's at a friend's house who had a living room the size of this, and we were all standing around watching this on a 16mm screen. And who was standing over here where you are in orange? And it's Rock Hudson. And he's looking at me. And I look back. And eventually he did a nod, follow me, so I followed. And we wound up in a bathroom upstairs. And the thing is, nothing happened. Because he was Rock Hudson. And I was so nervous, nothing was going to work.
Is that story in the book?
Yeah, that story's in the book.
That's how I know.
So anyway, that's the non-Rock Hudson story.
Marilu, you mentioned the year 1977 that this was happening, and Joel, you said Spelling Goldberg. You put those two things together, and what's on my mind is The Love Boat, which started then. What was some of the... The Love Boat went through 3 iterations of casting to have 3 different pilot movies. How did that all come together and your involvement in it?
Well, I came in and I did the 3rd one. And interesting, there were 3 Love Boat 2-hour movie pilots. No one from the first one made it into the last one. So my job was to recast the captain and the cruise director. And at this point, my boss, Fred Silverman, who had been an Uber boss at CBS, and then he went to ABC and eventually NBC, he called me up and he said very simply, get me someone from the Mary Tyler Moore Show for the captain. Which is very easy because Gavin MacLeod was the only one left. So that was done. And then, however, for the cruise director was insane because there was no character there was really no part, and there were 15 people making a decision. So I think I brought in every living ingenue in California. And one of the last people who came in, and she got it because of her personality and her Dorothy Hamill haircut. And that's how she got the part. That was it. And fortunately, well, not fortunately, I never cast the other episodes because I really did not like Doug Kramer, who was the other producer. I thought he only was interested in people he'd used before. He wasn't open to new people. And was like, bye. So that was that story.
What was your process for casting the Rocky Horror Picture Show with the cast already having been on stage? So what was the process for you with that?
Oh God, this is another good story. Thank
Good.
you. Okay, Rocky Horror. Where to begin it? Randall, you were there when this started. I knew Chris Sarandon and Susan Sarandon when they were married as a couple in New York. Lightly, and they had just moved out. And I was living in my one-bedroom apartment, and I had a dinner party, and it was Randall, Chris and Susan Sarandon, Bob Lamond, her former manager I've spoken to you about, Barry Bostwick, and who else? I don't know. But those are the important characters. The important thing... Oh, well, no, Tim Curry, but Tim isn't part of it. Tim created the role, and he was the only one that Actors Equity allowed to come over. So I had to cast the rest. And Meatloaf, by the way, came through. I was working with wonderful casting directors in New York, and Meatloaf walked into an audition, and that's how he had. I can't take credit for him. But anyway, so Chris Sarandon and Randall went into the bedroom to watch a movie. There was a Gloria Swanson TV movie called The Killer Bees, and they went into watch that, which leaves the rest of us in the living room. And end of story for that part. End of chapter 1. The next day, I get a call from your former manager, Bob Lamond, who said to me, "Well, did you see what happened last night?" And I said, "What do you mean?" It seems Susan and Barry locked eyes. And 2 days later, she left Chris and moved in with Barry. Okay, yes, okay. Now we start to part 2 of the story. So I'm casting the movie, Rocky Horror Show, and I call Susan's agent. She had just left small agents and went to very big ones. And I called, and I said, "I'd like to set up an audition for Susan Sarandon for the Rocky Horror Show." And I was told, "Well, this isn't the kind of thing we want her to do, and she certainly won't audition." So then the devious Joel Thurm comes up. So I called, and Barry Bostwick wanted to do it. I knew he wanted to do it. And I said, "Well, when you come in for your audition, just bring Susan with you and I'll do the rest." So he brings Susan to the audition, which is at the Roxy, just up the street. And so Barry comes in. Barry really knew nothing about this. And years later, we were talking, he said, "I was standing there, I was auditioning, but no one paid any attention to me." And I told him, "No one paid any attention to me because you didn't know it, but you already had the part." So anyway, I'm reading with Barry, and I stopped. I said, "You know what, this is silly. Why should he be reading with a 30-year-old bearded Jew when he could be reading with Susan?" And I said, "Susan, could you do me a favor and read with Barry?" She gets on stage, and she reads with Barry as the reader. And they turned to me, Jim Sharman, goes, "Who is she?" And I said, "Well, her name is blah, blah, blah." And he said, "Can she sing?" "I don't know." And I said, "Well, we'll ask her." And I said, "Susan, can..." And she said, "Well, not really. I didn't prepare anything." Well, I said, "Can you sing Happy Birthday?" So she sang Happy Birthday in that same sweet kind of soprano. And you know what happened after that. She got the part. Wow. And then, of course, here's the other side of it. They all go off to England, and 2 weeks later, and Susan and Barry ain't doing it anymore. So that's how that worked. Love it.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Anybody else?
Oh, come on. You gotta ask something.
Was there anybody you always wanted to work with and you just couldn't?
Lily Tomlin.
Wow.
To start with. The closest oh no, I did work with her, I forgot. It was this horrible movie with John Travolta and Moment by Moment. I forgot about that. Yeah. But I'm trying to think who else? I nixed Tom Cruise. I never got to work with him. I said I thought it was a bad idea.
Wow.
I said no to Don Johnson for Miami Vice.
Yeah, but he's on the cover.
Well, he's on the cover because these are recognizable people on the cover. Except for Pearl Bailey. Now nobody knows about Pearl Bailey anymore, which is I think a shame because she's the reason I'm sitting here talking to you.
Oh. Tell us why.
Well, I'll tell you why. Because Pearl Bailey was doing a show on Broadway called Hello Dolly. She was the 5th of the Broadway stars. And I must say, David Merrick was a genius because it was Carol Channing, Ginger Rogers, Betty Grable, I'm missing one. No, that was after me. Oh, I did that later. But anyway, so Merrick had the idea to do an all-black company. And it was just going to be for the road. And Betty Grable was playing the part on Broadway at that time. And the road company was so successful, including a cover of Life magazine with then-President Lyndon Johnson and Pearl Bailey taking bows, that he said, "Bye, Betty," and brought in Pearl's company overnight. And I was working in a business capacity at that point. I told you. And then But on my first day there, I was taken backstage to meet Pearl. And she could not have been more wonderful and nice to me. And she said, let's have dinner afterwards. And so I went back afterwards, and she had this giant brandy snifter full of these wonderful little muscle relaxers called Soma. So she encouraged me to take a handful, and we had some wine, and then we walked down the street to Sardi's. And basically, she adopted me. Her family was back in LA. So my job was to keep her happy, but I was the one being kept happy because I was learning so much about life and show business and all of that from Pearl. And then one day Pearl said to me, she said, don't tell anybody, but ABC wants me to do a show for them in California. Do you want to come and work on it? And my life has always been, yeah, why not? So I sublet my apartment. All I knew, I had to rent a car, and I knew I was going to live at a friend's house in Laurel Canyon on the street where I'm still living now.
Oh, wow.
And that's how I came to California. And that's why I owe Pearl, and that's why she's on the cover. I always, people who've done wonderful things for me, I try to, oh, here's a good one.
Okay.
No, it's called Years Later. Years and years, I don't know, maybe 15 years, but however the amount of years later. I'm head of talent for NBC, and we're doing a live production of the Carson McCullers play, A Member of the Wedding. And the and this time I knew you have to have a star in. It's a role of a housekeeper in the South and her relationship with a tomboy, i.e., lesbian young woman. And so we were doing this, and so I said, we need a star for this part, and I said, Lena Horne doesn't play maids, so that's not going to happen. But how many other nationally known black women stars were there? The answer is one. And they said, well, but I hear she's such a problem, and she's this and she's that. I said, no, she's not. It's the same thing. When a woman has a complaint, she's a bitch. When a man, he's a professional. I mean, that still happens today. So what do you call it? And so they gave her the part. So there's in rehearsals are happening. We get a call from the producer and director one day. She can't get through a run-through without going up on her lines. She said, will you talk to her? So I called her, and this is exactly what she told me, which is a story that was originally true about Ethel Waters, who had originated this part. And Pearl said, tell him when the fucking begins, I'll be there. And she was. When we did it live, she was perfect. And she didn't do any Pearl mannerisms with the hand. She didn't go off book. Every line and everything was perfect. And
No, go ahead.
No, I think that was the Years Later part.
Oh.
No, the Years Later part, the beginning of it was, we have now reversed positions. I'm the big executive. She comes into the office to meet me. She came early before the producer and director got in. And she walks in. There's certain images that are unforgettable. And I remember her coming in, and we looked at each other, and we grabbed each other, and I cried for 5 minutes. And then I was able to do for her what she did for me early on. And you have no idea how gratifying that was. Or maybe you do, because you can see it.
No, I mean, Joel, you're amazing because you've got this huge heart, and yet you've been in such a position of power. But as I said before, when you're one of Joel's people, you feel protected by you, defended by you. Was there anybody that you just couldn't get hired?
Oh, I really have to think about that.
I guess not.
I don't know.
That's
I
nice.
really don't know. I don't know, honestly. I'm sure there were.
Yeah.
But I just don't remember.
Question. What do you wish you had cast? What show do you wish you had cast that you didn't? Or film?
Oh, God, practically everything. No, I only cast 3 movies. I was never available to cast movies because I think maybe it's my parents' 30s era depression mentality, and I always opted over security. Security with a big thing. So, and the only 3 movies I cast were Grease, Airplane, and Rocky Horror Show.
Not so bad.
Which are 3 iconic movies. but I wish I'd been able to do more of them. I can't, almost, you name the movie and I wish I'd been able to do it, and I just wasn't able to. I did, what did I get? I got offered a couple of things, but I was working for NBC and I couldn't, and I don't remember what they were.
Do you have a favorite that you cast? Besides Taxi.
You know, the favorite, and I say the favorite, the most fun I had casting was Airplane.
Oh, I bet.
Airplane, because for several reasons. One of them, I was a little boy in real life in the Peter Graves cockpit thing. And as a little boy, I wished Peter Graves was my father. So, and also the airplane, the Zuckers and I were on the same page. I just knew what to say. I mean, I read the script and I was embarrassed to walk into the meeting because it was full of coffee stains and spit takes from reading the script. And I remember the first question they asked me was, what do we do about methyl merman? And I went, duh. Have you ever thought of asking Ethel Merman? And they looked at me and then they went on with it. What I found out later on was what they really meant is, what if we don't get Ethel Merman? Oh. And years later when I told them, well, then I would have said Carol Channing and Eartha Kitt in that order. Because they're instantly recognizable with signature songs. But I think that I had the most fun doing. Because they were laughing and the scenes were funny. And you know, that was the most fun, I think. If it wasn't for Alan Carr, I would have said Grease.
Any other questions?
But by the way, getting back to Grease, thanks to Randall, I had a lot of leeway on that. Eve Arden was not on Alan Carr's list. He wanted Fanny Flagg for that part. But I was diplomatic enough to say I knew Paramount would back me up. And I said, well, Eve Arden, come on, she was America's school teacher. But then I also knew, in order for Eve Arden to work, she needed to play off somebody. So I said, and there was no part, but I said, well, how about we get someone like Dodie Goodman? Dodie Goodman had no part, but Randall, you know, knew that it was okay, and that's how that happened. You know, and that was, you know, there are probably more Grease stories. You probably know the questions.
Well, Joel, what you're forgetting to say is how good a producer you are.
Yeah.
No, really, because you produced The Boy in the Plastic Bubble, and you produced It's My Party, which was my favorite film.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I was always afraid. I really was afraid, and I think because Alan got sick, I was able to do all these producer things with no portfolio. Randall came up and said, oh God, we just lost Magic Mountain. And I said, good, it'll work much better if we rent a school carnival. That's not a casting decision. You know, but another one. We're shooting Olivia Newton-John at the LA River, and there's no time. Randall was planning on shooting her close-up when she sings the Sandra D. Reprise. And you were very upset, and I said, it's a voiceover. You'll get her from here, and then it's a voiceover. You know, there were a bunch of things like that I knew, but I am the worst salesman in the world.
What?
I cannot sell myself.
Okay.
I can sell other people. I've never been good about selling myself.
You did something right.
Well, I wrote,
This is a big turnout.
But when I stopped casting and I tried to be an independent producer for 10 years, fair to middling success. I couldn't get past the 4th no. I should have pursued it to the 24th no. But I just couldn't. That's not. And you know, my brother was also not a great salesman. Even in an accounting firm, he couldn't bring in new clients. He wasn't a salesman. That's not. And salesmen make a lot more money than buyers, by the way. But I couldn't do it. I think I would have been a terrible agent. But if I did have to start all over again, by the way, I would have become an agent.
Why? Why is that?
Because that's where you have your fingers all over the place. All over the place. Oh, I think I just recognized someone who deserves to be introduced.
Okay.
See that man, bald man with the beard in the back? He is the man who did this cover.
Woo!
And his name was Glenn Hansen. And Glenn paid me when I saw some of, well, I didn't see some of his work. I called him, but I saw somebody else's work that was similar, and then he told me, no, that was not me, that was someone else. But I looked at his work, and obviously he did this, but he said that he wanted to do this project because he had seen all the casting work I did in the 80s. Oh. So 70s and 80s, okay. But basically, the reason that you want to open this book is because of him.
Well, the title's great too.
The title.
Well, the title's not bad, but yeah. And by the way, I had the title way before I had the book.
You did. You called me and said, in 2017.
But he did that. That's him. That's his work. And he looks good too. I've never seen him in person.
Okay, we're getting the signal. We got to wrap it up. Because you're going to sign, right? He's going to be signing.
Oh, God.
So, and everybody's going to want to talk to you, and this is a big turnout. So, yeah.
Thank you all for coming. What can I say?